and gentlemen, I am here with the recruiter in yoga pants, Amy Miller. Amy has worked at major tech companies like Google, like Microsoft. She's now at Amazon recruiting for Project Kuiper, which is their satellite project named after the most famous Dutch astronomer, which is something, of course, amazing as well. So let's just dive into what I think is the question that a lot of people would start by hearing an answer to. You have worked at all the major or most of the major Silicon Valley tech companies. What is the biggest misconception that other recruiters have about what it is like to recruit for those high tech dream companies?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception about any of these large companies is everyone thinks it's easy. And that's so is so interesting to me because the reality is these companies are huge. These companies are massive. There is no single kind of recruiting. There is no single process. There is no single even culture within these large companies can be so different from one team to another. Like at Google, for example, the culture and recruiting for cloud GCP was very different than recruiting for YouTube, for example. So like that's the biggest thing. You have to understand that not only are these organizations large and complex and oftentimes made up of small organizations within the big one, but just because a lot of people want to work here doesn't mean that my hiring managers want those people. So there's high expectations all around that recruiters have to navigate. It's not easy. That's the last word I would use.
All right. Yeah, yeah. I've heard a lot about big brand names. I know,
Yeah.
and of course, the downside of having a consumer brand is you can't really piss off applicants because they're also consumers.
I'm telling you, they will make it known that they're unhappy.
Yeah. All right. So let's focus on the sourcing of techies because that's where
Yeah.
you're amazingly good at. What do you think is the first thing that every sourcer should unlearn? What do they need to stop doing when you're hunting for tech talent?
Stop treating every prospect the same. Personalization, personalization, personalization. So what worked for you recruiting SDEs is going to look very different than what's going to work for you recruiting an hourly workforce, for example. So you have to really, if you're moving to a different organization or even moving to a different role or project or program within your company, you kind of have to unlearn what worked over there because it may not work over here. So that's the biggest thing. Like you really have to approach every search with a new, fresh, almost blank slate mindset. And you also have to really work hard to retain the personalization because I understand the need to scale. I get it. We don't always have the luxury of just one by one I'm going to email 5 people and I'm going to agonize for 20 minutes over every email I send. I understand we don't have that kind of time. But there has to be a balance between having that personalized one-to-one feel while also respecting and understanding that every search is different. And again, I'm saying like come in with a blank slate and unlearn everything, which makes it sound like, all your previous experiences out the window. That's not what I mean. You want to obviously keep track of what works and like figure out your own personal style, but you cannot treat every search the same.
All right. So you already said what you should be doing. What is
Yeah.
another big tip you have for people wanting to attract those unicorns, those uh, techies that are hunted by you and everybody else? How do
I
people
mean,
beat you?
Star Wars costumes seems to help. That seems to be. I'm not suggesting everyone should go dress up like Princess Leia, but I'm saying it could work.
For those
It
that
has
don't know
worked.
Amy, she has a very popular LinkedIn video dressed up as a Princess Leia asking for help. So,
Asking for help. But I think, costume aside, Boz, I think asking for help is the key. I think the more that recruiters can really humbly approach the market and just say, hey, I have this problem. I need to go hire, a rock star, superstar. Well, let's maybe not say rock star, but I need to go hire a fantastic, software engineer to lead trust and safety at YouTube, for example, which is something I've done. I've had to hire that person, and ask for help, like from a genuine, like seeking to understand, seeking to learn perspective. That draws so much more positive attention and prospects than I think a lot of recruiters, even when it's earned, I think it's kind of gross. But a lot of us can approach the search with a little more swagger than we probably should, right? We really come in and think that we're hot. Am I allowed to swear on this podcast? I'm not
Yes,
sure. Okay,
absolutely.
excellent. We come in thinking we're hot shit. We think that everyone should fall on their, over themselves to talk to us. And that is not the case, even in this market. And I understand it's an employer market right now, but it won't be forever. But I think just coming in with like a humble, seeking to learn mindset is huge. I've had lots of prospects respond really well to that. And I'm also really big on attracting people to talk to me. I don't necessarily, I get that's the job of a sorcerer a lot of times, but I'm not necessarily going and beating down a bunch of doors. I'm literally putting out information like, hey, who wants to come talk to me? And they come.
Okay, interesting. Well, I actually think that the Dutch market hasn't been an employer market for ages, to be honest. It's
Really interesting.
but that's a completely different subject for another
Round two.
thing. I want to know how you feel about all the tools that are out there for sourcing, the AI tools or any
Yeah.
tools for sourcing. How do you see them? How do you see them evolving? What should people be using? What shouldn't people be using? And how do you evaluate the tools?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things. First of all, definitely you should experiment. You should absolutely try out new things, test drive some of the new tools, find a rhythm, find a tool, a cadence that works for you. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but you have to balance it with getting too distracted. And I've worked with a lot of sourcers who've gotten very distracted by every new shiny tool that's out there. And they spend countless hours like testing chat GPT prompts and playing with all these different, and they get really caught up in the noise of it. And while y'all are doing that, I'm over here posting cartoons and have more candidates than I know what to do with. Right. So it's like, I don't think there's anything wrong, but it's just like any other tool. You can give me a truckload of tools. It doesn't mean I know how to build a house. There's so much more than simply having the tool in your hand. You have to be able to read the blueprints. You have to be able to know when's the time for a hammer versus when's the time for a screwdriver. Like there's so much complexity. And frankly, if I'm just hanging a picture on the wall, fairly simple thing, I don't need a circular saw. I need, well, I could use a shoe, honestly, but you know what I mean? You don't need a complex tool for that. So not every search, not every hire requires some super deep complex tech fix, but that doesn't mean you ignore them. There's a balance. You play with what works for you, you find the things that resonate, and you experiment from time to time. That's it. Keep it simple.
And looking into the future, do you think AI tools can replace sourcers?
Never,
Never.
never, never. Somebody has to wield the tool, right? Now, will it reduce the number of sourcers? Anything is possible, my friend. I'm not going to pretend that that couldn't happen. But if you have seen Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, okay, and remember they bring in the automation machine and dad loses his job screwing the caps on the toothpaste, what does he get hired to do at the end? Fix the machine. So that machine, just like any other HR tech tool, AI sourcing tool, you name it, is only as good as the person using it. That person is always going to have a job.
All right. What's your opinion on the value of employer branding and, for example, corporate careers websites when it comes to sourcing?
Oh, I think we all know that employer branding has been scrubbed and polished and legalized. I'm branding. I love branding. I work closely with my branding team. And I think good branding embraces authenticity. And this is something I love about my current role because I do work very closely with our branding team, not only helping create content, but even just pushing content out. But there's a lot of focus on keeping it human and keeping it real. And that really is the secret sauce. So I think it's great to have landing pages. And I'm a big fan of like interview prep tips or employee stories, things like that I think are amazing. But I think, even small companies can do that. It costs $0 to go pull up a chair next to your friend and talk about, hey, let's talk about, your job and why you like it. And let's record it and throw it up on YouTube. You can do that for free. So branding is wonderful, but it's better when it's authentic.
No, definitely. But do you think it helps having decent branding, decent videos, a decent landing page in sourcing better people? There's
Hmm.
always a debate about that.
There is, I could argue either side. Which one would you like? But in all seriousness, I think it helps. I don't know if I would say so much that it helps more than I would say that it doesn't hurt. Right? Because here's the reality. No matter how much branding you have, and again, I come from large companies the last decade or so, been with 3 major tech companies, as we discussed, and all of them have a brand. All of them have very full, you know, careers pages and all kinds of content and things like that. And that's wonderful. But people still have preconceived notions based on their personal experience with a company representative, based on previous, whether as a customer or maybe as a candidate. So, really, that stuff is either going to validate what someone knows or it's going to be, oh, that's not true. That's just like, if you already are a fan of the company, you're going to be like, oh, this is great. Look at this branding stuff. And I love this video. If you don't like the company for whatever reason, you're going to look at that same video and think that it's just made up, advertising nonsense. So does it help? Maybe it maybe helps people who already like you. Is it going
Yeah,
to change anyone's mind? I'm not sure.
yeah, probably you're right. It probably differs on the context of how much do people already think they know the
Yeah,
company, and yeah, everybody thinks they know something about Google, Microsoft, and Amazon.
sure.
Yet,
Yeah.
if your company is less known, um, there might be a difference. Yeah, no, good point.
And once you're inside, right? And I run into this a lot in my current role because I do work for a very highly specialized business group. We do something that's never been done here before. We're, I don't have the benefit of a lot of internal transfers, for example, because it's highly specialized. So you can't compare. You can't look at a software, AWS, for example, and then look at us and say, oh, yeah, it's exactly the same. Not even close. Very different business groups.
All right. Amazing. So one last final question. What
Yeah.
is the one tip you have for every person out there that wants those impossible to hire tech hires?
Impossible to hire. I mean, I think you have to be prepared to lead with data. I understand the impossible hire. I have had to hire we're talking literal rocket scientists. Okay. We joke about recruiting isn't rocket science until it is, until you are finding the person who was literally the scientist who invented a rocket or something.
Yeah.
Then it
And you
becomes
and
a
you
different
are
game.
hiring rocket scientists for the space program
Literally.
of Amazon. So yeah.
Exactly. It's hard. But I will tell you, that's where you have to come with data. And so one of the things that I love to do, I am a fan of HireEZ. For those that use HireEZ, we do have a license. I use it a lot. And I will actually sit down with my hiring manager and say, okay, great. You want a rocket scientist who can do all these things. Let's plug that in. And I will live source with them and we calibrate. And when we pull up the results and say, there are 7 people in the world that do this, and only 2 of them would, fit like the US persons criteria, for example, because we have that in some of our roles, many of our roles. How would you like to proceed? And every time they're like, What can I live without? And so you take that impossible search
Yeah.
and you start making it realistic.
All right. I love that tip. Amy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.